Bari Yereko. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to NAASR's Barton Gregorian building, and welcome to those of you participating on the Zoom. We are all gathered here today for a special celebration for Marc Mamigonian, Director of Academic Affairs. Thank you for being with us. My name is Silva Sedraki, and I am the Executive Director at NAASR. This year marks the 25th year of Marc's dedication and commitment to NAASR. Numbers never lie, Marc. It's a true dedication, and we are very fortunate. In fact, 20 years of Marc's dedication to NAASR means 25 years of successful programming at NAASR, and 25 years of supporting scholars in Armenian studies. This could never have been possible without the support of our skilled and dedicated board, our members, donors, and supporters. If you are not a member, please consider joining NAASR's family. It's very rewarding. I work with Marc every day. I rely on him for accurate information. I rely on his judgment and his sense of responsibility, which comes with humility. I remember when I joined NAASR, it was probably a week in the job, in the office. One day I told him, Marc, if there's anything that you disagree with me that I do, please let me know. He said right away, oh, you will hear from me. So I knew right away that I could count on him, on his trustworthiness and his integrity, which I need the most in my job. So let us begin this special event in Marc's honor. Our event will start with a brief musical performance by Tanya Bartevyan, pianist, improviser, followed by a conversation with Marc, facilitated by Dr. Khatchig Mouradian. Tanya Bartevyan is a concert pianist and multifaceted musician who has performed extensively in the US and abroad. Her playing has been praised for its passion, intelligence, and sensitivity. Tanya was born and raised in Istanbul, where she started her musical studies at the age of 3. She holds degrees from Harvard University and New England Conservatory of Music, where she also pursued composition and conducting. Her interests include theatrical performance, natural preservation, sciences, and truth in public discourse. Tanya is delighted to be part of this celebration for Marc. She's honored to be his friend and to have learned so much from him about the nature of denialism and other areas of Armenian studies. Our facilitator tonight is Dr. Khatchig Mouradian, who traveled all the way from DC to be here tonight for this event. Dr. Mouradian is a lecturer in Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African studies at Columbia University, and the Armenian and Georgian area specialist at the Library of Congress. He serves as a co-principal investigator of the project on Armenian genocide denial at the Global Institute for Advanced Studies in New York University. Dr. Mouradian serves on the board and on the academic committee of NAASR. No stranger to Massachusetts, Dr. Mouradian has made presentations at NAASR previously, and the latest one being Gas Balloons, Emperors, and Armenian Map Makers, a cartographic journey through the Library of Congress's collection. That was last December. Before we begin, I would like to take the opportunity to thank many who helped organize this event. NAASR's chairperson, Judith Sarian, Laura Yardumian, and Ani Babayan, NAASR's staff, David Bedzoyan, who's behind the camera, and many of you cannot see him on the Zoom, but he graciously offered his services tonight. Tanya Bartevyan, Dr. Khatchig Mouradian, and our volunteers, especially Roger Hagopian. You will learn later why I'm naming his name. So Marc, on behalf of NAASR's Board of the Directors and NAASR's staff, congratulations, and thank you very much for your service. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see such a wonderful crowd here tonight. And it's my pleasure to be in conversation with Marc. Just like many other great encounters in history, my my first meeting with Marc, when and where it was, is shrouded in mystery. But I have to say that, over the past at least decade, he has been a wonderful colleague, friend, supporter. But more about that later. Let me start by a brief introduction, and then we'll start our conversation.
This isn't Frost Nixon,
So Marc is the Director of Academic Affairs of NAASR, where he has worked since 1998. He grew up in Dover, New Hampshire, graduated from the University of New Hampshire for undergraduate studies and Tufts University for graduate studies. He's a co-author of the volume Annotations to James Joyce's Ulysses, Oxford University Press 2022, with John Turner and Sam Sloat, and is the co-author of annotated editions of James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, 2014, and Ulysses, 2015. He has served as the editor of the Journal of Armenian Studies and the volume The Armenians of New England, Armenian Heritage Press 2004, has published articles in Genocide Studies International, James Joyce Quarterly, Armenian Review, Journal of Society of Armenian Studies, and elsewhere. His chapter, Weaponizing the First Amendment, Denial of the Armenian Genocide, and the U.S. Courts, is forthcoming in Denial of Genocide in the 21st Century by Bedros Dermatosyan, editor, University of Nebraska Press. So without further ado, let's start.
Let's.
Marc, why don't you take us back to the very beginning? Talk a little bit about growing up in New England and first influences.
Yeah, well, as you said, I grew up in Dover, New Hampshire, which is a small town about an hour north of here in the seacoast southeastern part of New Hampshire. There is not an Armenian community there. I've done a little bit of research on the Armenians in Dover, New Hampshire, and there have never been more than a few handfuls. And when I was growing up, there was maybe a handful of families. However, typically, most of us were on the same little street. So there was us, there were the Kasabians, there were my grandparents, there were a couple of Greek families, a Jewish family. It's one of these old world things replicating itself in the new world. But certainly growing up in a town and in a place like that, nobody among my friends or in school knew anything about the Armenians. But it didn't really matter. They were informed in due course, and it was a great place to grow up, really. I can't relate to this because I was sort of immersed in an entirely Armenian world. But in that kind of environment, as you're growing up, can you talk a little bit about that, those two worlds, and the ways in which you're sort of, learning more about your Armenian identity and culture, and at the same time, the broader, the world outside kind of thing? Yeah, I mean, my parents and my grandparents and aunts and uncles certainly encouraged me to learn about Armenian stuff, Armenian history, and my heritage. We didn't have, and as I think about it, there really weren't that many books. We had in the house the history of Vartan. We had Kirkchan's history of Armenia. We had a few other items which I read and tried to extract something out of. And one of my aunts, my Aunt Polly, was a NAASR member. I didn't know that at the time, but she would give me books to kind of try to inculcate some kind of sense of Armenian-ness. One of the books she gave me, I have here, is The Urchin, which was a genocide survivor memoir that was published in the late 70s. It was also called Some of Us Survived. People may have read it. I don't really remember anything specifically about the book now because I haven't read it in so many years, but I remember that it made a great impact on me. One of the other books is Once There Was and Was Not, Armenian Folktales book by Virginia Tastjan and illustrated by Nani Horgogian, which I absolutely loved and couldn't get enough of. And many years later, working at NAASR, and I got to know Nani Horgogian and her husband, David Kurdian. I had her sign copy for me. And then one day, Virginia Tastjan walked in to the NAASR bookstore. And you're Virginia Tastjan? I said, yes. Can you just wait for a few minutes? I'm going to run home and get this book because I really want you to sign it too. And she said, sure, of course, I'd be very happy to. And I ran home and came back, and she was gone. No, she wasn't. She had waited, and she very graciously signed the book. But I wouldn't want to give the impression, because it would be totally wrong, that every day growing up I was like 2 hours a day spending on Armenian stuff. It just didn't work that way. But I suppose it came up more than it might have, and I think that's because my parents encouraged it and other family members encouraged it. Not my brothers, they discouraged it all the time. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
All right. I get it. So, was your introduction essentially, was your immersion into the Armenian community like through NAASR, pretty much?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, before I started working at NAASR, I had very limited interaction with and involvement with the Armenian community, not much beyond going to Masis and Eastern Lamajun, and occasionally coming to the NAASR bookstore, which I would do from time to time. I had no kind of immersion in the community, even though I lived in the Boston area, from the early 90s when I came down here for graduate school. So that was a definite learning experience.
It's fascinating, right? When, the way identity works and the way in which at different stages of our lives, sometimes we find ourselves, fully immersed in something, and then other stages we're just that level of detachment. So what was your, how did you start here?
I came here with one of my cousins, my cousin Julie, one day in, I guess, 1997 to talk to Manuk Young, because Manuk was my cousin. I meant to look up exactly what kind of cousins were something like second cousins twice removed or something like that. Anyway, we're cousins. And I had been told that I should talk to Manuk Young because he knew a lot about family history. So I came down to meet with him, and my cousin and I came down to meet with him. And he did know a lot about family history and about lots of other things. And I just enjoyed talking to him and thought, this could be interesting. I need a job. He seems to need someone to do some stuff. Maybe something can be arranged here. So I came back to talk to him about that, and eventually something was arranged.
And
it's not because I knew a lot about Armenian studies. I can assure you of that.
It was just plain nepotism.
I would like to think that he saw something. I don't know what it was.
Just because it's today, I'll take your word for it.
In all honesty, I don't know what it was. But I'm grateful to him for seeing it or imagining that he saw it, because I think it was a good thing for both of us.
That's great. So, we're talking a quarter of a century during which essentially you work with the founders of NAASR, right? And then have witnessed this institution get here. So do you want to perhaps reflect on that period and transformations that it went through?
Yeah. I mean, when I started here, people's cell phones didn't go off because you would have had to been carrying around this brick-sized thing with you, and it just wasn't feasible at the time. But no, the technology here, speaking of cell phones, was different than it is now. When I started working here, there was a computer. I would love to show a picture of it. I can't, but if you were around in 1985, and you remember the computers with the green screen with the flashing cursor and big floppy disks, that was the computer that we had. And in many respects, that great technology notwithstanding, things were done largely as they had been done since the 50s by Manuk. Unfortunately, I'm referring to the 1850s. No, but no, it was, things were done the way they had been done for a long time. And it's not like I was some cutting edge, technology whiz kid, but I knew that things had to be moved forward a little bit, and eventually they were. But in terms of working with some of the founders, people like Manuk, Richard Fry, Greg Adamian. I mean, some of these people were very much not just still involved and active when I started, but for years afterwards. And to be able to learn from them and work with them, and to think, Richard Fry, he was taught by Blake at Harvard. Blake was taught by Nikolai Marr, and the next thing you know, you feel like you're connected to all of Armenian history writing just through this one person. And I knew that the organization needed to sort of reinvigorate itself. That was obvious, but it was also obvious what a great, strong organization it was, or at least I thought it was obvious, and that there was a lot that could be done still. And this is the problem. Once you start mentioning people's names, you realize that there are so many more people's names that need to be mentioned. So let me just do that briefly. Manuk was of course, there have only been a few chair people of NAASR, and it's been my pleasure to work for and work with all of them. And when Nancy Khatchig, hi Nancy, took over as chair in the early 2000s, that allowed for a tremendous development of my role and of NAASR in general, and I can never ever thank her enough for that, and for all the things she did for this organization and does. And Rafi Yagayan, I don't think Rafi's here, but Rafi came after Nancy, and Rafi has served this organization for at least half a century, probably longer, in various capacities, and he's a person of just great decency and integrity. And Yervant, who I think might be watching but is in Florida right now, showed such great leadership that we have this building that we're in today, and that we're not in the lovely paneling of the former building of 395 Concord Avenue, and so many other things that has allowed this organization to grow. So I wanted to just say that. And
you've been part of this growth, but this growth also has been mirrored, also largely as a direct consequence of NAASR's existence by growth in Armenian studies, right? So talk a little bit about that. First, that kind of the ways in which NAASR fostered growth in Armenian studies, and then also perhaps a little bit about the last quarter of a century of Armenian studies.
Yeah, I hope certainly that we've contributed to the growth of the field in the past 25 years. Certainly the organization contributed to the birth of the field in this country in the first place. And when you look over the past almost 70 years that Armenian studies has been officially a thing in this country in the sense of there being permanent programs, I think NAASR has contributed quite a bit. In the past 25 years, there have been the creation of a lot of new chairs in Armenian studies and programs in Armenian studies, not because NAASR raised the money for those chairs, which is not the case, but because the field existed in the first place and allowed for the proliferation of the development of the field. And to have people to populate those positions is a big part of the development of the field. You can create all the chairs and programs you want, but if there aren't scholars to occupy them, then you haven't really done anything. So I think that's been crucial, and it sort of grows on itself exponentially. The more these programs proliferate, the more people come out of them, and then they go out into the field and create more positions. And I think we've seen a lot more activity, programs, conferences, lectures over the past 10 to 20 years. And certainly a lot more here, that's for sure, but I think in general, and I think if you do more, it inspires other people to do more as well.
And perhaps also, you know, we've seen a lot more lectures and events here, but also we have seen, to use the word exponential, right, an exponential growth in NAASR's support of scholarship, right?
Yeah.
Both in terms of grants, in terms of the different ways in which researchers, scholars, young scholars, students feel assisted, supported by NAASR. I'm certainly a case in point, right? At every stage of my academic growth and career here in the United States, you know, I have felt, you know, the support of NAASR at every single stage. And even now, I almost feel like, you know, my students are benefiting from that. And it's this kind of, and I do feel like that kind of impact, again, with particularly the grants are a good example. Perhaps you can talk about that as well. Can you talk about this exponential shift that perhaps happened maybe over the past decade or so in terms of output and in terms of attention?
But first I have to mention something, because I did
Sure.
what I was afraid I was going to do before, that is that I neglected to mention that we also have a new current chairperson, Judy Sarian, who is also here and whom I enjoy working with greatly as well. So that covers all of the chairs. Okay.
All
now,
right.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Khatchig?
Exponential growth.
Yeah. I mean, I went back recently, and if I were smarter, I would have had these notes with me, and looked at the number of programs that we as an organization were doing 25, 20, 10, 15 years ago. And it was, 20 years ago, we were doing maybe 10 events a year. Thought that was pretty good. The past few years, it's more like 50. And part of that is that we're doing more. Part of it is that we work with more partners. And that's, I think, hugely important, because you can't do everything yourself, and why would you try? So you find others to work with. So we partner with all sorts of groups, including, you at Columbia, and people in California, and at other universities and Armenian organizations and so forth. And again, the more you do, the more people want to do things with you, and hopefully you do them well, and then even more people want to do things with you. But I look around now, I can barely keep up with the events we are doing, much less all of the things that other groups are doing, which are equally good. So I think I love that problem.
Great. All right. Enough about NAASR. Let's talk about some of your. When one thinks about your scholarship and your work.
Can I say something else about
Go ahead.
NAASR?
Well, if you have to, if you must.
Yeah. Because there are a couple more people who I feel obliged to mention, truly. I mean, it was my good luck that Sandra Georgian was working here and had been working here for many years before I started, and worked here for many years after I started. And, I've said this before, other people have said this before, if it wasn't for Sandra, I literally don't know what would have happened to the organization. She did so much for so long and in so many different capacities, it makes your head spin. And I can't say that enough. It was just an incredible experience to work with her. And everyone I've had the privilege of working with here has been wonderful, and especially the current people I have to work with, whose names have been mentioned before, Silva and Ani and Laura, and thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Oh, absolutely.
I could spend 2 hours saying thank you to people, and should, but that's. I'll think of more after.
All right.
Moving right along.
Like it. Yes. So when we think about your work, your scholarship, beyond all the support and assistance you're providing all of us scholars, there's a few themes perhaps that emerge, right? Armenian genocide denial is one, certainly. Armenian American history and the history of Armenian studies is another, and Ulysses is a third.
Mm.
Can you talk a little bit
Connect
about
the dots.
No, please don't. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, my work is partly shaped by the fact that my command of Armenian is not great. So I can do things working around that. I can do work on things in English for the most part. And genocide denial is something that has always been of interest to me because it's always, like everybody else here, I suppose, stuck in my throat when I've encountered it ever since I was a kid. And you would read things and think, how can they say that? That is a question I've sort of stopped asking. How can they say that? Because they keep saying it. But I wanted to eventually understand more about how they say that. Not necessarily why they say it, but what effect it has, and how does this thing work, this denial thing. And at a certain point also, I wanted to try to connect it to other kinds of denial that I would encounter reading the newspaper or in books and magazines. And because I was frustrated by the fact that what seemed so self-evidently obvious to me, that this is denial, that people should care about that the way I care about it, and the way you care about it, and the way everybody else here cares about it. But it isn't self-evident to other people why they should care about it. Maybe one way of making it more clear why they should care about it is to connect it to other kinds of denial that they do care about. And perhaps that's a way of getting people to do something about it. I don't know if that will happen or not, but I do think that there's a greater level of knowledge now, generally, about denial and how denial works, broadly speaking, than there was even, 10 years ago, much less 20 or 25 years ago. So I'm pleased about that. Armenian American history and Armenian American stuff, I'm less pleased about because less has been done. I think it's super interesting and important that the history of this community that we're part of here be taken seriously. I know there are a few people here in this room who have done more than a little to contribute to that, but I think a lot more needs to be done. I love the Armenians of New England book that we did years ago. I would love to see much, much more like that done. The history of this community goes back now a long ways. My earliest ancestor came here in 1888. That's a pretty good chunk of American history overall. So we need to write that history and the literature that's been created and the art that's been created by this community needs to be studied. One of my other props that I brought is a copy of My Name is Aram, which was and is one of my favorite books, and is a book that I used to read pretty much every year when I was a kid. So my notions of what it meant to be Armenian somehow, I think, all derive probably from that book, even though I didn't grow up in Fresno, but my middle name is Aram. So, what else? Ulysses. Oh, Ulysses. Yes. Well, that really is something that I've spent more than 25 years of my life on. Since before I started working at NAASR, I had one of my close friends, who I hope is watching on Zoom, John Turner, who is the co-author of all these things that I've done on Joyce, pulled me into a project to write annotations for Ulysses. It would be a very, very long and not necessarily very interesting story to tell you how that all worked out, but decades later anyway, it produced some, I think, useful work. And what I like about the work and and where I do connect it with the work I do at NAASR and on denial is that it is, even though it is a fictional work, Ulysses, it's loaded with, and its bedrock is this vast amount of factual material. And the annotations, which, our volume runs to about 1,400 pages, which is kind of a lot, is a way of documenting that in a way that takes it seriously, even though it's fictional, and that it is not an attempt to tell people what the book means or how they should read it. It's an attempt to provide that factual grounding that we think is useful for people trying to wrestle with what is a challenging book in many respects. It's a fun book too, by the way, and I would encourage you to read it. Not the annotations, those are fun too, but Ulysses is a fun book. People don't believe that, but it really is.
Perhaps to wrap my portion of this up and maybe open it up for questions, I don't know if this question has more than one component. It probably does, but I'm thinking along two lines. One is looking ahead at your work and where you see NAASR going, where you see your interests evolving and moving, which is the kind of thing that you can plan, one hopes, or think ahead. That's on the one hand. And on the other, circumstances, right? Crises, the pandemic being one, where, how they say, one shouldn't let, any good crisis go to waste. And I do think NAASR did that with the pandemic in terms of the tremendous reach that NAASR programming suddenly gained through the Zoom events and the online reach. So perhaps, and of course in the Armenian reality, speaking of crisis, it's difficult to think of a point in time perhaps, certainly in the last 25 years, where either Armenia proper or Armenian communities in different parts of the world have been, you see, I told this is going in a number of directions, in hopes that we'll bring it back somewhere and put it. So in this kind of reality, looking ahead, both in terms of what you think, what you'd like to see, and in terms of adapting to shifting circumstances, where do you see yourself in NAASR, period?
Well, to go to the question of the pandemic, it was, right, just about 3 years ago exactly that we shut things down here in terms of in-person stuff and, in general. And it was a great, it turned out to be an interesting opportunity to do something that we had thought and talked about how to do for a long time, which is, we do our programs and events here. We do them in a few other physical locations around the country, and people who can go to those, enjoy going to them. Those who don't go to them would often write or call and say, oh, I live in fill in the blank. I wish we had things like that where I live. So we always wanted to be more present online for people to be able to enjoy that stuff. The pandemic forced that to happen, and we tried to adapt to that as quickly as possible, as quickly as we could figure out how Zoom works, and how not to blow things up when you do a webinar. A few practices, and we were able to do that. And it's been great in the sense that people all over the world, I mean, that's the Armenian reality, right? Armenians it's a global diaspora, and our audience is global, therefore. And of course, to the extent that our audience is not just solely Armenian, it's global anyway. But it's wonderful to have people in Armenia and in Europe and every continent. Laura claims also in Antarctica. I just don't even know what that means, but perhaps some penguins have worked out how to use Zoom, and they're watching too on occasion. But it's been fantastic because it has reached so many more people. We have to continue to try to do that. Not abandoning doing things in person. Like tonight, we're doing it in person and online. I hope there are people watching online. Anybody? I think my mother's watching anyway, so hi. But you talked about grants before. This has been something that we've worked on for years, trying to increase. Funds are finite. You can't can't give what you haven't got. But we've tried to increase gradually over the years the amount that we give out in grants, and we also work with our friends at the Knights of Vartan to give out grants out of their fund as well. And it's, I think, one of the best things that happens is when, and you are one of these people, when we give someone a grant, they do their work, they publish it, and then they come and they give a talk about that work. And you can sort of see the whole process right there, that you gave someone some money, they put it to good use, and they produced something that other people will then go and use. And that is one of the best parts of doing this job, seeing the results of these usually not extravagant investments and what people are able to do with them. And usually it's to people early in their career, and they are almost invariably grateful for the support that they receive at an early part of their career, and you feel like you've accomplished something. I think it's great.
And sometimes also in terms of things that just have, come up, right? I feel like NAASR in recent years has organized certain events, Zoom, webinars, etc., where on topics that are extremely timely, discussions around topics that that are very urgent. Talk a little bit about that, and then let's open it up.
Again, the Zoom thing has made that possible to do kind of rapid response events that generally would not have happened so much in the old days when you had to make sure that you had the space and send out a mailing and so on and so forth. You can do things in not quite in real time, but closer to real time than I would have ever imagined 10 or 15 years ago. And this is important. And again, it's been really rewarding to hear from people, even though it was terrible what was going on during the war in 2020 and its aftermath, the appreciation for some of the programs that were done to inform them about what was going on or to discuss and analyze what was going on, and that there was some sense of almost community comfort in that. And that's nice to hear as well. You're trying to inform people and you're trying to raise the bar and all that, of course, but there's also the human element of people just needing to be literally or virtually together to hear about what's happening and to commiserate.
Great. Thank you.
Can I mention one other thing?
Oh, please go ahead.
Because I found this recently. When I was in the 7th grade, we had
you got my attention.
Yeah, no, this is a surprise. When we were in the 7th grade in my English class, we had an assignment. I don't know why particularly, but we were studying gravestones. And there's a very old cemetery in the town where I grew up, and we went to the cemetery to look at these gravestones going back to the 1600s in some cases. And the assignment was we were supposed to, create your own gravestone. I don't think this would work today, by the way. Something tells me that this might not happen now. Anyway, wow. I don't know why.
Wow.
But so you read it just down to here. Well, okay, I'll read it. It says, and then I'm going to give it to you. It says, "Here lies Marc Mamigonian, born May 10th, 1968. Age 69, died May 17th, 2027. Because that was so far in the future at the time. Age 69, proving that math was not my strongest subject. Because that would have been age 59, by the way. Cause of death. Read that, please. In the middle.
Died in the Armenian Revolution, saving a comrade.
I found this recently, and I read that, and what the hell was I thinking? What could those words even have meant to me in the 7th grade? I have no idea.
I started thinking, what the hell was your teacher thinking? But let's set that aside. This is fascinating. Wow. All right.
I mean, I could have been referring to space travel for all I knew about the Armenian Revolution. I really didn't. Anyway, there you have it. Perhaps.
All right.
Perhaps there was something latent that had to come out.
All right. So I think it's time for us to let this dialogue to rest. And open it up to the public for questions and comments. And this also applies to everyone watching in Zoom, the 2 people. In fact, we do have close to 50 people on Zoom. So yes, I will be looking at the questions as they come in. So if you have any questions, please send them along. And yes, Steve.
I have one anecdote that I'd like to recall, having never met Marc back in the day. And I'm not even sure he was here at NAASR, but we brought up denialism. And he wrote a letter to the Globe. The Globe had no real policy on how it referred to the genocide. And some copy editors would put alleged in there. And there was an obituary of the great deadite from across the street, Reverend Hartunian. Bartevyan Hartunian had passed away in the late 90s. And I had gotten involved with the Armenian genocide issue, having gone back with my father to his village and written about it. But the obituary, which was otherwise fine, mentioned that Reverend Hartunian was a survivor of the alleged genocide. And, no big stir, was maybe a letter or two, a phone call or two. But Marc wrote a letter. And what Marc's letter was so powerful because, as it said, here's a man who has dedicated his life to forgiveness, but has gone through the most harrowing experience that any person, because he was a survivor of the genocide, and you have made his life a lie. That stopped the newsroom. Not too many times in the Boston Globe would a newsroom come down, but I had 5 editors outside of my office holding Marc's letter with, what's this about? What did we do? How did we get this wrong? And I said, people have talked to you about this. You have had no policy. and you allow copy editors to put the word alleged, and there is no alleged. And next day, the policy was changed, and it has ever been thus. So while there have been some elsewhere denialism, there's no more denialism in the Boston Globe, only because of Marc Mamigonian.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I was at NAASR then, yes, because shortly after they published the letter, I got a phone call one day from your father saying, "You shouldn't criticize the Globe." Honest to God. I said, "Well, Mr. Kirkjian, so
It's that respect for authority that we are, yes.
We're working at the Globe.
yeah, family first. Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
What would you say is today the biggest challenge to Armenian identity?
What is the biggest challenge to Armenian identity? That is a difficult question, Pam. I don't know, but that maybe the biggest challenge to Armenian identity is the notion that there is a singular Armenian identity. Because, you know, as I look around the room and you know, everybody here, I see such a variety of Armenian identities. And I look at my own self and my family, and there's a variety of Armenian identities. So I wouldn't want to, I know that wasn't your point, by the way, but I would want to beware of identifying any one Armenian identity that as such. I don't know that there's a big challenge. I don't know if I can identify a big challenge to Armenian identity, except that it changes. And I guess that's always a challenge. And that what the things that meant Armenian identity to me are probably different than what it meant to my father or to my grandparents. Not that I ever asked them. Perhaps I should have. But it changes, and sometimes the fact that it changes bugs people, and it makes them dig in their heels, and I think that's also a challenge. I see a lot of challenges to Armenia and to Armenians. I'm not sure I can identify other challenges to Armenian identity, except that people should realize that it flows, man.
Yep. Yes.
This building, I think, is reflective of the great new age of NASA. It's really the renaissance of NASA. I had the privilege to serve on the board of NASA during what might be called the dark period of time.
The dark ages.
The 1990s, when things were quite difficult, and it was difficult to get things done and to carve out a new direction. And one of the things I've noticed about Marc, and from the very beginning, when I first met him in the late 90s, is that, Marshall McLuhan used to say the medium is the message. And you can have the strongest arguments in the world, but if you don't have the character and the personality and the wit and charm, some of which you've seen tonight.
Thank you very much.
You can't get your message across. You can't get your message across. And whenever I see Marc in a public forum, particularly in front of Americans, not Armenians, because we spend a lot of time talking among ourselves, but Marc is a fabulous goodwill ambassador for Armenian issues. And he's got courage. He'll go in any forum and debate and represent the Armenian cause with great articulation under pressure. This was no more evident to me than at a forum at Harvard, the John F. Kennedy School, a number of years ago. Marc, it must have been, 10 or 12, 14 years ago. And Marc was on a panel, a human rights panel, And the issue of the Armenian genocide came up, and that was what his mission was, to represent that point of view. And it was a packed hall. It used to be called the Arco Forum. It was a packed hall at the Kennedy School of Government and Politics. There were a lot of international people there. And the hall was filled with Turks, Turkish students, Turkish graduate students, who attempted to shout Marc down. And Marc held his ground, and he didn't shout back. He proceeded with calmness, with a soft voice, and he kept getting the message across and getting the message across. And those people who were not Turks there all applauded Marc's ability to keep cool and present the arguments. And he made a lot of friends that night who knew nothing about NASA, knew nothing about the Armenian genocide or denialists, what have you. And Marc is just a fabulous representative of us, and he's a blessing to our community. So Marc, I'm glad to be here after 25 years. I can't believe it's been that long. So thank God that you're with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. You know, if you would have ever, I was thinking about this earlier today, if you would have ever told me, you know, back when I was envisioning the Armenian Revolution and whatnot, that I would have to speak in front of people. That was not something I was comfortable with when I was growing up at all. And I learned to do it. And I'm not particularly comfortable speaking about myself in front of people, but I don't mind speaking about other people. But yeah, I would not have ever envisioned having that role, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Marc, let's take a couple questions from Zoom.
Oh, let's.
Michael Bobelian has a question. Congratulations, Marc. What are one or two of the most exciting events, you got to take sides now, you've attended during your years at NAASR?
Most exciting events. Well, Paul Bogosian mentioned one of them, actually. That event at Harvard was indeed quite an evening. And yeah, it was electric in a way that wasn't always good, but certainly was interesting. We did a program here in the old building at least 10 years ago, I forget exactly what year, on everyone's favorite subject, the murder of Archbishop Turian in the 1930s. And there were, as I recall, more than 200 people crammed into that old room, outside the room, the bookstore, the entryway, because people were either wanted to hear about it because it was something that never got talked about, or they were angry that it was being talked about, or what, I don't know. But there were more people there for that than anything I can remember in that old building. There was an event that our friend Steve Kirkchin did. Is Steve still here, or did we lose him? Well, never mind, I'm not going to talk about that. No, Steve had gone over to Istanbul to attend Hrant Dink's funeral, and he came back and gave a talk immediately after that at the First Armenian Church across the street. That, again, it seemed like everybody in the community came out for that, and it was quite a remarkable event. There was one non-NAASR event that I went to very early on in my time here at Northeastern. Israel Charney was speaking at Northeastern, and he was speaking, as was his wont, about genocide denial and about the Armenian genocide. And it was a mixed audience of Northeastern people, Armenians, Turks, and others. And there was a contingent of a couple of very vocal, angry Turkish people in the audience who I thought were going to attack Professor Charney. It was very, very close to turning into a riot. And I've never seen anything like that since, fortunately.
All right. Any questions from the audience here? Yes.
What's a turn or a topic that has been has delighted or surprised you?
All right, so the question is, the audience on Zoom would like us to repeat the question. So
Yeah,
the question is,
right.
what is a topic in Armenian studies recently that has delighted or surprised you?
Well, there's a lot of them let me mention a couple. One is just generally that in recent years, again, Armenian studies is a term that we all use, and we have an idea in our mind of what it means. And what it means to me might not be exactly the same as what it means to every other person involved in Armenian studies. But we try to take, I hope, a pretty broad view of what Armenian studies entails. There's been, in recent years, a lot more room made in Armenian studies for issues relating to women, where this had not traditionally been the case, and it's now, yes, Lerna is smiling and nodding knowingly because she's one of the people who is doing this work, indeed, and others. This has been a huge, huge advance in Armenian studies. One of the other areas that has developed a lot just in the past decade, and this has been rather gratifying, is that because Taner Akjam and I used to talk about this and complain about it and wonder when this was going to change. For a long time, there was work being done on the Armenian Genocide, but there was no research of much note being done on the 1890s, on the Hamidian massacres in the 1890s. Past decade or so, there is a great flourishing of important work on this period. It used to be impossible to find good scholarly works on that. It now is very much possible. Another area is on denial itself. The study of denial itself has developed hugely in the past decade. Not just of the Armenian Genocide, but in general. Khatchig,
All right.
you have been part of this as well. You were, I think, the first person who published anything I ever wrote on denial, so thank you.
It is fascinating to witness, right, over the past decade or so, these major transformations in Armenian studies. At a time when, again, just like eight years ago, it was so difficult to find texts for university students, right, on a variety of subjects. And now, that's become so much easier with, particularly on gender, on denial, etc. Not just great scholarship, but also good scholarship, accessible scholarship, and one that is in conversation with what's out there. Yeah. I think that's been wonderful.
What does the internet say?
Well, the internet says, Professor Christina Maranzi has a question, which will sort of put you on the spot, Mark. I told you about this. What is the funniest, strangest, most surprising thing that ever happened at NAASR in your experience? Would you like to preface this by something here? I think
I'd like to preface it by thanking Christina so much for asking that question. And I'm so sorry that you aren't here in person for me to answer it. A lot of funny things happen here, actually. Many of them can't be repeated. They just can't. Since it's Christina asking, it reminds me of something else, which is that one of Christina's predecessors at Tufts University, Christina isn't at Tufts anymore, but Christina's predecessor at Tufts University, the late Lucy Dermanuelian, was a wonderful, wonderful person, and she used to be at every NAASR event right there in the front row with her notepads and so forth. And she was just one of the nicest and most supportive people that I encountered. This is not funny yet, I realize. I'm getting there. and she was always very kind and complimentary. And sometimes, usually on a Thursday night when we would have a lecture, and I would come in the following morning, and there would be a message on the answering machine. Hi, Mark, it's Lucy Mamigonian from Tufts. It would be like 3 in the morning, you know. You'd hear the beep, 3 a.m., you know. I just wanted to tell you, you're doing a wonderful job, and it was a great program last night, and, you know, I just really wanted to share that. See you soon. Beep. Then there'd be another message. It's Lucy again. Could you please tell people when they're speaking, you speak so clearly. Could you tell them to make sure they speak clearly and speak into the microphone? Because it's really annoying when you can't hear them. Thanks. Beep. You know, if people used illustrations for their programs and their lectures, it would be so much more effective.
Such a wonderful event.
That's all I wanted to say. Bye. Beep. You know, think, wow. I just loved the fact that people cared enough to do that, and were so eager to share their own experiences. But it always was funny. Actually, the whole Mamigonian clan, they were always very, very supportive and nice. Hi, Vigen, Lucy, amazing people that we will not see their like again coming through this community. My God.
Absolutely. All right. As we're approaching, we probably can take 1 or 2 more questions.
Please,
yes.
make it something funny. I'll try harder next time.
No, go ahead, please do.
Well, I just want to say, NAASR is so welcoming. And when I think of welcoming, I think of you and Sandra Durigian when I came here to do research on my family history, to understand the background of my father's experience through the genocide. And it was just the openness, the warmth, giving me Richard Hovhannissian's telephone number at UCLA. And I call up and he's at the office, hello, and I get to learn a little bit more about my grandfather and my family history in the Armenian Republic. And I just want to say that I am not a scholar, I'm not an expert, but you welcomed me, and thank you. And it gave me a chance to, it wasn't like, who are you? No, it wasn't that. It's like, no,
Oh, we know who you are.
You're like an average Armenian Joe, right? But going in there. But that's pretty good. If you're an average Armenian Joe in the society at large, maybe I shouldn't talk like this, but we're not doing bad. So I just thank you for that, because it brought me on a journey that I'm still experiencing.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Roger. All right, a question from Zoom, John Turner.
Okay.
Can you talk a bit about Armenian studies as an intercultural dialogue? To what extent is Armenian studies dependent upon developments or otherwise, to say, in Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Russia?
Who is this guy? Yeah, I mean, look, Armenian studies is not is not under a glass dome, right? It doesn't exist separate from Turkish studies, Russian studies, English literature, sociology, psychology, and everything else. So if it isn't in dialogue with other fields and other disciplines, then it's not working. Because, I mean, look at Armenia geographically today and in history. It is, for better or for worse, involved with, influenced by, and enmeshed with its neighbors. What was the second part of the question?
As an intercultural dialogue, I think you're addressing it.
Yeah, I mean, it is affected. It is affected, not always for the better, but it has to be affected. It can't be reactive. I'm not sure if this is what the question was getting at. It can't be reactive to what is going on in Turkish or Azerbaijan studies, but it has to be cognizant of what's going on, for sure.
Right.
That wasn't funny either.
The pressure is on you people. Come on. Any questions further?
You should reiterate how the Zoom folks should enter their question.
Yeah, so please, I mean, although I'm checking everything here, the chat and the Q&A, the best way to ask questions for everyone that's on Zoom is through the Q&A option. I do have,
So
yes.
I wanted to mention something. I've never taken a class in Armenian history. When I was in graduate school at Tufts, that was when George Bernuccian was coming up and teaching an Armenian history class. And I sat in on that because John Baronian, another person who's like we won't see again, who was Mr. Tuft, and who was by some means that only he could possibly explain related to me. Also, it's one of those things that, it would be like a whole week of Henry Louis Gates explaining how we're related. But he invited me to, why don't you come sit in on the class? Okay, we'll do it. And we would show up together, and we would sit off to the side, and John would whisper to me during class. Whisper to me during class. His whisper could be heard, in Medford Square. And but it was the first time I'd heard anyone talk seriously about Armenian history. And I remember at the first class, George said something along the lines of, it was mostly Armenian students in the class. You think you know something about Armenian history because you went to Sunday school and you heard nice stories about Noah's Ark and so forth. You don't know anything about Armenian history. That's not Armenian history. We're going to talk about real Armenian history in this class. And we did. I didn't because I was just sitting there listening. But and years later, when I started working at NAASR, I went to hear George speak somewhere around here. He said, I know you. How do I know you? I sat in on the class at Tufts. Yes, that was you. You and Mr. Baronian. Yeah, exactly. So, but to hear someone actually talking about Armenian history, again, in a serious way, was very eye-opening for me, and we miss George, too.
All right, so...
A million laughs.
One more.
Can I make a gift to Marc and Nasser?
How much?
Yes, so please go ahead, yeah.
Permission?
Absolutely, please.
So I have number of...
Can you please approach the microphone?
Let's try.
Yeah, the people can't.
Maybe you can come this way.
So these are the photos from my last exhibition I had back in 2019. And since that time, I had no chance to do that because of coronavirus. And as usually, I present some photos to people of the photos of themselves. That's the law. And the last photo exhibition I named America, Armenia, because that was collection of etudes, photos, objects, people, both from Armenia and from United States. But definitely what was related to American images was related to Armenian communities, to all activities that Armenians do here, and of course, NAASR. So I collected some photos related to NAASR and would like to present them now, because I had no chance to do that during coronavirus. But it was actually better because I got very nice chance to do it right now.
Thank you, Ken. Let's see.
Okay.
Sure.
So there are some photos related actually definitely to Nasser, but I will present them backwards. Marc is known not only in America, he's known also in Armenia. Some people may not recall his name instantly, but definitely they say, oh, that nice guy at Nasser. So, recently I filed appeal for Argam Ayvazyan, and especially for that, I would like to present a photo of Knights and Vartan in association with your work, common work.
Great, thank you.
The next three photos, actually two photos. The next two photos are related to the nice ceremony of opening of this beautiful building. I was present at the day, and I did a couple of photos. So this is a photo of clergy.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miles.
I appreciate that. Remember, I present them in backward sequence. Of course, I couldn't miss a chance to exhibit a photo of former director, Tsar Ignatius, speaking at the time of opening ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you. Arakрафian, very nice.
And finally, the most important photo about Marc. I will tell a bit about this photo edit. You remember?
Very nice. Thank you.
I had no chance to place anywhere else. Otherwise, if I'll write on your hands, it will be like tattoo.
Too bad I didn't shave that day. Oh, well.
So that was actually probably back in 2010, kind of that. Before, because of that time, I was collecting photos of people, and of course objects and activities, but especially people here and there to present in the both countries. So definitely, I was glad to have in my collection photo of Marc, and I was happy to present that photo at my last exhibition, and much more happy to present directly to Marc.
Thank you, Ken.
In connection of his 25 years at NAASR. Enjoy them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, I need to mention one other thing, Khatchig.
Yes.
Sarah Ignatius, who's in one of these pictures and who isn't here tonight, but I think might be watching, and I hope she is watching, and I hope she is watching with her father, Paul, another person who, I got to know through NAASR, both Sarah and Paul, but Paul Ignatius, just knowing Paul Ignatius, you feel like you are suddenly connected to everything that's, in history that has, I mean, multiple histories, Armenian history, American history, you name it. It's unbelievable. And also having had the chance to work with Sarah for the years that she was the executive director and the growth that took place at NAASR during that time was an incredible, incredible privilege as well. So I'm sorry you're not here, Sarah, but thank you.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you, everyone. So, Marc, now I'm going to ask you to leave the podium because we have a little surprise for you.
Okay.
Thank you again for indulging us.
Thank you.
In this conversation.
Khatchig.
There's one final round here that's that's coming up. Yes.
Dear Mark, it is hard to believe it has been 25 years since you started at NAASR. It has been 23 years since you met me. I don't know which was more difficult for you, but for me, it is a great happiness to have a friend like you and to know a director like you. Over the years, you have been a great help, not only to me, but especially to my students. Thank you very much for all help that you provided. And I believe that NAASR will move forward to better goals with you. Thank you again for all your contributions and congratulations.
Happy anniversary, Mark.
Happy anniversary, Mark. 25 years.
Seems like yesterday when you came, and yet it seems like you are eternal.
And you know, you introduced us, so it's an extra special time for us in your life.
Hi, Mark. Warm greetings from Clark University and congratulations. I want to share a brief anecdote here. In my history of Armenia class, my students learned about Mamigonian dynasty, how they were fighting to preserve Armenian language, Armenian religion, and towards the end of the class, they asked if there were any Mamigonians anywhere in the world. They were nicely surprised to learn that there is a Mamigonian only about 45 minutes away from them. This Mamigonian is also a leader, not a military leader, but an academic leader. His stronghold is not across the ocean, but in Belmont, and it's called NAASR. He continues to fight for preservation of Armenian language, history, but he fights not with a sword, with his pen, with his fantastic scholarship, by preserving books, articles, publications. And I wanted to thank you for all your fascinating work that you have been doing all these years, and also for your continued support of my academic journey.
Hi, this is a short message to congratulate my friend Marc Mamigonian for a quarter century of working in tilling the fields of Armenian research and studies and making things better for the rest of us, both as scholars and as educators who have students. So congratulations, Mark. I've known you for at least 15 of those 25 years, and I can testify that your work has been really, really influential and very important. Thank you for all your efforts, and I wish you continued success. Take care.
Hello, Mark. I am excited beyond belief to congratulate you on your amazing 25 years at NAASR. You have had such a tremendous impact, not just on the fields of Armenian studies and Armenian genocide studies, for which you would be celebrated anyway, but on so many of our lives as scholars, as activists, as community members. I myself owe you an incredible debt for all that you've done for me, and I know that sentiment is shared not just across the region, but across the country, across the world, in the community of Armenians. Thank you so much for all you've done for these 25 years, and I am excited to see what you're going to do in the next 25 years, if I can keep up with you. Take care, and best wishes again.
Hey Mark, it's me. For once, I'm not reaching out with the request. I know that over the past 15 years, if you had a penny for every single time I called you with a request, you'd be retired somewhere in the south of France now, sipping on champagne or something. But here we are, because you never got those pennies, and instead I'm sending you this recording. I truly very much appreciate all that you have done for me as a journalist, a student, a graduate student, a professor, and then later on, everything that you've done and continue to do to me and my students. in terms of your support and encouragement and help. And I wish you all the best. And I realize that I'm just one of many, many people who have, over the years, over the past quarter of a century, benefited from your kindness, support, and generosity. Thank you, and thank you to NAASR for having you and appreciating you.
Hi, Marc. Greeting from Geneva. A few seconds only, but heartfelt, in order to say to you, merci beaucoup, grazie mille. Really, thank you so much for all the amazing work you have done, you are doing for the field of the Armenian studies at NAASR. Already 25 years at NAASR, it's really, I can't believe it. It's amazing. It's amazing all the work you have done, all the events you have organized, all the people you have brought together. Really, thank you so much. It is always a very great pleasure to work with you. And I wish that we will have an opportunity to see in person very soon, not only behind the screen. And meanwhile, please convey my very best greetings to all the colleagues and staff at NAASR, to your lovely family, and to the Huron Avenue. Once more, my thanks, all my congratulations, and my best wishes for 25 more years at NAASR in the field of the Armenian studies, and of course of work together. Bye, Marc. Thank you.
Marc, thank you so much for accepting my article for publication in the Journal of Society for Armenian Studies. This was back in 2004. It was my second year in the United States. I was just a miserable master's student at NYU, and you including that piece in the journal made a big difference for me, especially because it was rejected by the other Armenian Studies journal at the time. And thank you for continued support all these years whenever I inquired about anything, and whenever I needed a person to brainstorm with about some of my ideas, you were there. We all appreciate your incredible generosity at NAASR in the last 25 years.
Hello, Marc. I don't really know where to start talking about you, talking about Marc Mamigonian. First of all, it has been a blessing receiving his advice and wisdom for the past 10 years, his brilliant and thoughtful comments, which have enhanced my analysis in ways I did not imagine possible. Marc has challenged and motivated me to dig deeper in the history and fortify my research. I have valued our conversations, and I'm a better historian thanks to the dedication and energy he has invested in me. His encouragement and insight guided my project and had a profound impact on my final products. Without his unprecedented help and support, bulk of my work would have not been possible. Marc has been a wonderful colleague and friend and source of inspiration. I owe a special note of gratitude to his longtime friendship, who could not resist my incessant demands and has always given me incredible encouragement and intellectual stimulation. In my academic journey, Marc has always been there, omnipresent, with a priceless help all the time. His presence gives you confidence, and his steadiness motivates you. Thank you, Marc. I have no clue what we could do without you. I cannot even contemplate it. So glad we have you. I'm so glad I have you, not only as a longtime friend and mentor, but most importantly, my eternal and our eternal bagel friendship with you. Thank you.
Dear Marc, the impression of your being a gentle giant physically is complemented by your enormous contributions to the advancement of Armenian and related studies. Fortunately, that has helped to elevate NAASR to its highest academic level ever, and is also fortunate that your contributions are widely appreciated and recognized. Sharnage Surp Gorza. Richard.
everyone. I'm Judy Sarian, and I just have a few parting words. I just wanted to ask everyone a question. Who would like to guess how many programs Marc has organized and produced? Any guesses out there? Marc, do you have a guess? I should have given you a warning.
I don't know.
Well, whatever it is, I'm sure it is a record in Armenian studies. I remember Marc telling us a story about his good friend, the late Martin Duranian, a well-known dentist who had written several books about the history of the Armenians in Husenik. And I remember that talk here, or not here, but at the older building, very well. But also about the Armenians of Worcester. I think the title is Worcester is America. Once Martin said to Marc, if we don't do it, who else is going to tell our story and continue our important work? Marc has carried the NAASR torch with devotion and determination for 25 years. We wish him many more. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I know this has made the evening even more special, and we're so happy that you're here. It's wonderful to see all your faces, all your smiling faces. We also want to invite you for our reception, which is right outside. Please join us, and please congratulate Marc in person. Thank you so much. And I guess Marc has something to say.
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you. And I just wanted to, I'm not retiring, by the way, but, nonetheless, I want to thank all of you for being here and or online, and for your kind words, for the support that you provide to me and to this organization and to Armenian Studies, especially all the people who are NAASR members. Thank you, because that makes it possible. The members of the board, people who have served over the years, thank you for being unswervingly supportive over the years. And to my family, especially my wife, Michelle, and son, Miles, and my mother, and my brothers, and my nephew, who showed up late, but it's okay. There's not a problem. And no, my whole family, who are interested in and supportive of my work, thank you. And I just say thank you all very, very, very much. I truly appreciate it. Thanks.